What's up everybody, I'm Derek, this is Rocking eForge, and today I'm going to be showing you how I forge a pair of tongs the easy way. So, let's get rocking. Alright, so I'm starting with already cold, 1/2 by 1/4 inch flat stock. And the way this is going to be easy is that I'm not going to forge the reins hardly at all. Now this is obviously going to be very small, if you can tell. But this concept can be extended to other styles of tongs. You just need the associated size of flat stock that will correspond with the size of tongs that you want to make. So if you haven't figured out, the concept here is to just simply take a piece of flat stock and split it in half. For the most part, leaving enough material at each end to forge the jaws of a given pair of tongs that you're trying to design. Now the split portions obviously become the reins, and the rest of the portions, each end will become the jaws and the boss of the tongs. Now the goal here is to follow this shape of this other pair of tongs that I've forged by simply just chiseling down the center of this flat stock, and then chiseling at an angle here, and then chiseling halfway down into what's going to become the transition between the boss and the jaws, wherever you want to do that. Now I'm going to make this chisel cut about 1.5 inches from the end, and then I want to make sure that the boss is roughly square, maybe a little oblong. It's okay if it ends up a little oblong, but the biggest thing here is to obviously not cut the center mark all the way into where your boss is going to be. So I'm gonna go ahead and lay those out now just below a black heat so that I can see where I'm measuring and where I want all these cuts to be. Now, the plan here with the jaw is to chisel halfway in to the bar to kind of where that center line would line up, and then twist the jaw outward away from the main body of the parent stock in order to create the jaw. And I know this is a piece of 1/2 inch stock. I'm going to chisel halfway up from this far edge to the center line. From that current chisel mark, maybe a little bit more than 1/2 inch, and that will end up becoming the boss. And that gives me a point to chisel this center groove to before I end up cutting through my boss as well. Now I'm going to do that on the other end, and I'll meet you back here in just a second. Actually, now that I think on it, it is very worth noting here that when you spin your bar around, chisel marks on each side the same way that you did on the other end. Let me chisel them in, and then it's very obvious. Those chisel marks will be on opposite sides of the flat stock, but when you turn it over, it should look the same, i.e. it should kind of have that S shape to it that you have on both sides. Now, if all you have is some sort of hot cut chisel, and if you don't have a handled hot cut chisel, check out the video link in one of the corners here. I love using this thing. This thing is awesome. But the strength in this project is all you really need is a hot cut chisel. But one negative aspect of only using a chisel here is that you are going to spread that material weird, and eventually as you get closer and closer to cutting all the way through this, it will end up with that chisel shape all the way through to the far side of the piece, and you'll have an angle to the cross section all the way along the reins that you will have to either forge in or grind off or what have you. So in order to save myself some time, I'm gonna head to the bandsaw and make all these cuts, and then I will come back and show you how to continue forging the rest of the tongs. And now that I've got those cut apart, I'm just gonna toss these in reins first into the fire, and I'm just gonna bring this to the anvil and even up those reins. Because no matter how good you are, even if you're using a chisel, the cut between the two reins is going to be lumpy and awkward, and you'll need to just kind of even everything out. And before I get too deep into this, I want to go clean up these corners, because I hope you can see there's a bit of a rag from those cuts, and I don't want that to work its way into the steel as I forge this, because that could propagate a crack and split these reins down the middle, which would be pretty bad. Now, the odds of that happening are pretty low. These are going to be very light use scrolling tongs, but I just like to make sure that I avoid cracks at every turn, regardless of the piece that I'm working on. Now I'm just going to forge a nice little square taper on the end of this. And then I'm going to just come in and forge down on the corners. In order to make these more comfortable to hold on to. And a weakness to this that I'm discovering right now is that if you go too skinny, the reins like to flop all over the place and bend and go crazy when you're forging on them, which shouldn't be too much of an issue once it's cold. And then I'm gonna just put a nice little scroll, decorative scroll on the end of this. That's just a way to make this pair of quick tongs a little nicer looking. And I'm thinking these reins are way too long. But that's okay. And do the same thing with the other side. All right, so now that I've got the reins roughed in, I'm going to spin this around, heat up the jaws, and bend those, and I will talk about that at the vise. Now, there is a method to this that you probably want to follow, in that if you are a right-handed smith, you want to twist this to the right. And if you are a left-handed, I'm not going to twist this to the left, but if you are a left-handed smith, you'll want to twist to the left. And the reason for that is simply the way that a pair of tongs fits in your non-dominant hand. And there is a reason for that. As you can see, both these pairs of tongs and almost every pair of tongs that I own, with the exception of one that I made backwards, the top rein of the tongs comes in on the left-hand side, or the non-dominant hand side of the pair of tongs. And the reason for that is because if you are letting go of a pair of tongs to let go of a piece, you want to be able to hold on to this rein with your thumb and the inside of your hand while letting go of the other rein of the tongs, so that you can just let it go, and that the tongs will kind of naturally fall into your hand as opposed to away from. This tends to be the most comfortable way to hold a pair of tongs, which is why most people just forge a right-handed pair of tongs, which is made for use in your left hand or your non-dominant hand. If you are left-handed and your right hand is your non-dominant hand, you will actually want to flip-flop where the reins are and twist to the left in order to make those tongs more comfortable in your right hand. Now you will also notice that I twisted the jaws here the same direction, and you very much want to twist the jaws in the same direction per each side of the tongs that you were making, so that when you rotate that one side to meet together, the jaws will meet together and the boss will come into contact on the inner wall. Otherwise, you will have those jaws pointed the opposite direction once you rotate them and fit them together at the end. The next step in this process is to forge the boss round, and we're simply going to do that by heating this up and bringing it to the edges of the anvil and forging down on that square that the boss is right now, and then rounding up those corners just by varying the height of our tong hand in order to forge that into a rough circle. Now you can still see the edge of that twist in that portion, and the way we're going to get rid of that is to bring it to the near edge of the anvil and hammer down on that, and then we're going to rotate as we forge there in order to drive the edge of the anvil in and kind of flatten everything down in there. Then we're going to do the same thing on the boss side by taking it to the far edge of the anvil and rotating that in that way. Now, a big reason why I don't do this style of tong making very frequently is that there is a major weakness to it. When you twist the jaw over, especially if the point of the twist isn't very hot at the time of the twist, you can actually develop cracks in this portion, which will make this the weakest portion of the tongs, and the transition from the boss, where the fulcrum of the tongs is, and the jaws, where you're putting most of that force or stress, making this the weakest point is not a recipe for success. So what you want to do once you've kind of got everything at least roughed in is file out any sharp edges inside this twist so that you minimize the risk of that crack propagating. And I just like to use a half round file here because you can get that edge right into the point of that twist without taking off a ton of extra material into the jaws. And you want to make sure you touch up the inside edge of the jaw on the other portion of that twist as well, just to make sure you get rid of any possible cracks in there. And do the same thing with the other side, and you should be all good to go. And something you may want to do to make sure that the jaws line up really nice is to just grind off this corner by bringing it to a grinder or using that file that we were using earlier, and just grind that corner down so that nothing rubs when everything is riveted together. And as you can see, that should do a pretty good job at making sure nothing catches as you're trying to close the tongs once you've got the boss riveted up. Now, if you have the boss too skinny or the jaws too wide, you'll end up getting overlap because the center line of the boss down here is not the same as the center line of the jaws, and the jaws will just never meet up. Now I'm getting ready to rivet these tongs together, and in order to do that, I need a hole in the boss. Now, this is normally where I would punch the hole in the center of each boss, drift it to the right thickness if needed, and then ream out any extra material using the drill press so that the rivet fits in the hole there. But given how little material is here, and I'm still concerned about any potential cracking at the point where the boss transitions to the jaws, I don't want to shake that up any more than I need to, and as such, I'm just going to drill a 1/4 inch hole for this 1/4 inch rivet. Now, granted, this is still only about 1/2 inch wide, which means ultimately I'm not going to have a ton of extra material here around the rivet, but this is such a small pair of tongs, I'm not concerned about that because I'm never going to use this for anything huge. If you have extended the concepts of this video to wider or thicker stock, you may still want to go ahead and punch through the boss. That will give you a little bit of spread and remove less material if you do it correctly than you would if you were strictly drilling. But before I go to the drill press, I'm just going to center punch a mark on each of these bosses. And center punching here strictly gives me just a little bit of a point to put the drill bit on the drill press. It doesn't actually do me anything other than that. It does give you the opportunity to move the hole if you punch it. If you end up a little too far off center, using that calibrated eyeball. Now I'm just gonna start using a thinner drill bit than that 1/4 inch hole that I want to drill. And then come in with a 1/4 inch drill bit to finish drilling out that hole. That previous hole just removed a bit of material that I didn't want to necessarily try to hog out with one drill bit. Now, that hole looks comically large for that size of boss, but as I mentioned previous, these tongs are very obviously not going to be for heavy use, and as such, I'm not super concerned about it. And now, I can go ahead and drop this in there, and we are ready to rivet this all up. Now, as you can probably tell, the rivet is far too long for this application. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this back to the vise and cut off about a 1/4 inch of rivet here, just to make sure I don't get a head that is wider than the boss. And then I'm gonna stick it in the fire and bring it back here, flatten this, and then use a ball peen hammer to rivet the head over and spread that so that it locks everything together. All right, so as I said, first thing I'm gonna do is just flatten this down. I'm using a ball peen, which is fine. Part of what I'm doing here is just upsetting that back into that hole so that it kind of spreads out and evens everything out. And then I'm gonna switch to the ball peen to spread that head out. And I'm gonna try to focus on the edges to round everything out a little bit, make it look a little nicer. And this would usually be the time where you can just pry everything apart, but these reins are so skinny that I actually ended up bending that one, so I'll have to address that after the fact. But that is a pretty well finished pair. Now, you can do any number of things with the jaws, and you'd want to do that obviously before you riveted everything together. I left these as flat jaws, strictly because this was made to be an educational or an informative video. And you want to make sure that once you've got everything riveted together, you want to go heat everything up and hammer everything together and then make sure that everything lines up perfectly. These ended up lining up pretty darn close right off the bat, so I'm not going to worry too much about improving them. You can do any number of things with the jaws if you want to forge a groove in the middle and forge some across the jaws themselves in order to make a pair of wolf jaw tongs. If you end up putting a little extra shape in them, you can make bolt jaw tongs or V-bit tongs like these. And the V-bit simply requires a wedge-shaped tool to forge in that groove as opposed to anything round, etc. So the possibilities are endless with this style of tongs. You just need to start with a piece of stock that is suited to the size and durability requirements of the pair of tongs that you're trying to make. But all in all, I am pretty happy with the way these tiny tongs turned out. Last thing I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna stick it back in the fire really briefly. I'm gonna touch mark right on that rivet, because I think it's about the only spot on this pair of tongs that is wide enough to fit my touch mark on. And then I'm gonna brush everything up and try to get rid of any excess forge scale, and then we will be finished with this little project. Oh yeah, perfect. All right, and that is going to finish up this pair of tiny tongs. I do hope that you enjoyed kind of this alternate means or way of forging a pair of tongs. I actually really enjoy the way these turned out. I just think they're adorable, you know? Very skinny, very small pair of flat jaw tongs, and I don't know how useful they'll be, but they will make a nice little conversation piece the next time I get together with some other blacksmiths. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like, leave a comment, hit subscribe, ring that notification bell. If you want to support me and the channel further, please consider becoming an honorary striker on my Patreon. That link is in the description below the video, or please consider becoming a member on my YouTube channel. And as always, keep on rocking. Now these took me about 3 hours to whip out, and a normal pair of tongs, if you were starting with, say, square stock or round stock, would have taken me far longer, usually take me at least a full day, if not 2 days worth of work, because of how long it takes to forge out a pair of reins if you're doing it by hand. If you have access to a power hammer or a hydraulic press, that obviously would speed things up a lot. But this way of making tongs really streamlines the process when it comes to making the reins the size that you want them to. You just need to size the stock that you're starting with according to the size, shape, thickness, and style of tongs that you're making, so that you get higher levels of rigidity and you don't get nearly as much flex or spring, and you can actually clamp things with the jaws that are, larger than a paper clip. These aren't going to be big main use tongs in my shop. They're just going to be almost a decoration, but this video gets the point across at the very least. So thanks for watching.